In the year 2251, the Galactic Coalition had become an unstoppable force across the stars. The species that made up the coalition had formed alliances millennia ago. Their technology and knowledge far surpassed anything that had ever existed before. Each race brought something unique to the table. The Shinthar were masters of energy manipulation, their ships harnessing solar winds for propulsion. The Veltrax could fold space with a thought, while the Pharanth could terraform entire planets in weeks. The coalition was built on cooperation, each species contributing its strengths to create a force capable of uniting the galaxy under its rule. Peace had reigned for centuries, yet all of that was about to change when a signal arrived from the uncharted zone of space. No one knew where it came from or who sent it, but the message was simple and terrifying. One ship, one battle, one victory. And the name of the sender was clear: the Deathworlders. A race no one had ever encountered before. Earth was the name of their homeworld, a planet so dangerous that only the hardiest of creatures could survive its brutal ecosystems and unpredictable climates. Humanity had evolved in a crucible of extinction events and savage competition. Their species was forged through survival. The message sent from Earth contained only the coordinates of the Deathworlder fleet and a challenge no one had ever seen before. The Galactic Coalition laughed off the message at first. Surely the Deathworlders were a myth, or perhaps some misguided fool seeking attention. But when the scouts arrived at the specified location, their faces drained of color. The signal had not been a hoax. The humans had arrived. The Deathworlders didn't come with thousands of ships or mighty war fleets. They came with a single ship, one ship that defied belief. The Iron Leviathan was a massive vessel, unlike anything the Coalition had ever encountered. Its design was primitive in appearance, but its sheer size and durability were impossible to ignore. It didn't look like a warship at all, more like a fortress on the move. It had no traditional engines or weapons. Instead, it seemed to be a giant hulk of technology, built for one purpose: to survive and to kill. There was no known species capable of building such a ship, much less maintaining it, much less using it in battle. The message accompanying the Iron Leviathan was direct and uncompromising. Humanity was declaring its right to rule the galaxy. They weren't asking, they weren't negotiating, they weren't giving anyone the option to decline. The Coalition had two choices: meet them in battle or face utter destruction. It was a declaration of war, but one so bizarrely simple that it took the leaders of the Coalition by surprise. At first, they refused to take it seriously. After all, no one had ever heard of such a challenge. No one had ever fought a war with a single ship. Surely the humans would be easy to defeat. Surely they could be reasoned with. But the Iron Leviathan had already made its first move. The Coalition's outer rim colonies had already been struck by the humans. Their ships were obliterated in a series of swift attacks. No warning, no negotiation, just pure, ruthless action. The Iron Leviathan didn't need a fleet. It didn't need anything but itself. And that was enough to send the galaxy into a panic. No one knew what they were facing, but one thing was clear: humanity had just made its presence known, and the galaxy would never be the same. The Galactic Coalition could not afford to ignore the threat posed by the Deathworlders. No matter how ridiculous their challenge seemed at first, the sudden destruction of multiple outer rim colonies had sparked a sense of urgency across the galaxy. Every species within the Coalition was in turmoil. The Shinthar immediately began to analyze the nature of the attacks, trying to determine the technology of the humans, but found nothing they could understand. Their energy signatures were unlike anything the Coalition had encountered. Their tactics were unpredictable and brutal. It was as if they had no regard for any rules of warfare. Their only goal was to win. The Veltrax, renowned for their ability to fold space itself, tried to use their advanced warp technologies to catch the Iron Leviathan off guard, but the human ship had already adapted. It seemed that every move they made was anticipated with terrifying precision. Every ambush failed, every strategy crumbled under the overwhelming force of humanity's relentless ingenuity. The Coalition's military leadership convened, and despite the doubts and fears of many, they agreed on one thing: this could not go unanswered. They had to respond with full force, or risk losing the galaxy to these unknown invaders. The decision was made to assemble a fleet that would show the Deathworlders the true power of the Galactic Coalition Every available warship was mobilized, from the smallest interceptors to the massive dreadnoughts that formed the core of the fleet. The Council of Commanders gave their orders, and within a few standard cycles a massive armada was prepared to face the single human vessel. They knew they could overwhelm it. With sheer numbers, they believed the humans would falter when faced with a battle they could not win. Their arrogance led them to underestimate what they were truly up against. As the Coalition fleet assembled in the Farron Nebula, a region of space known for its volatile gravitational anomalies, the Iron Leviathan entered the battlefield calmly, and without fanfare its sensors scanned the incoming fleet. Its AI systems running complex calculations in milliseconds, the human ship didn't hesitate for even a second. When the first shots were fired from the Coalition's warships, the Leviathan shifted, its massive hull absorbing the blast with ease. The battle began with the deafening roar of weapons fire and explosions filling the vast emptiness of space, but the Iron Leviathan seemed unaffected. Each blow to its shields was shrugged off as if the ship was simply taking a momentary breath. The Coalition fleet advanced, confident that their superior numbers would soon make quick work of the lone ship. But that confidence began to crumble. The Leviathan moved in ways no ship of its size should have been able to. It was almost as if it could predict where the next attack would come from, as if it was alive in its understanding of warfare. The human ship fired its weapons with deadly precision and power. Each shot from its massive plasma cannons ripped through the hulls of Coalition ships, reducing entire sections to molten debris. The first few waves of Coalition ships were obliterated in minutes. The humans showed no mercy. The Coalition commanders scrambled to organize a defense, but every move they made was countered with terrifying accuracy. The Iron Leviathan appeared to have no weaknesses and no limits. Its shields absorbed the barrage from dozens of ships, and its weapons returned fire with devastating force. The remaining ships of the Coalition tried to regroup but found themselves constantly under attack from all directions. They couldn't even find an opening to retaliate properly. The human ship was everywhere at once and nowhere at all. Panic spread through the Coalition fleet as it became increasingly clear that the Deathworlders had no intention of losing this battle. The situation was only getting worse with every passing minute, and despite their overwhelming numbers, the Coalition was being systematically torn apart by a single human warship. As the battle raged on, the Coalition fleet found itself in disarray. What was once a unified armada had devolved into chaos. The sheer size of the Iron Leviathan and its ability to outmaneuver and outfight ships far faster and more technologically advanced than itself was a shock no one had prepared for. Coalition commanders frantically tried to reorganize, to regroup, but their communications were jammed, their battle plans were compromised, and their ships were falling one after another. Every moment the Deathworlder ship stayed in the fight, it tore further through the fleet's heart. The first line of defense was gone, then the second, and now the remaining ships were scattered, desperately trying to escape the relentless barrage of plasma bolts and railgun fire. The Iron Leviathan didn't seem to care about overwhelming the fleet with sheer firepower. It didn't need to. It struck precisely, surgically. Every shot that hit its target shattered a portion of the Coalition's military presence, destroying entire command vessels, obliterating their shield arrays, and tearing through fighter squadrons with unnerving efficiency. There were no wasted shots, no unnecessary maneuvers, just a cold, calculated execution of a war plan the Coalition had never seen before. It wasn't just advanced technology they were facing. It was a battle philosophy honed in a deadly crucible of survival. A survival instinct so deeply ingrained in the Deathworlders that even the most advanced species of the galaxy couldn't understand it. From the bridge of one of the Coalition's flagship vessels, General Cathar of the Pharanth watched the destruction unfold before him. His vast eyes, accustomed to the sudden shifts in battle strategies, widened as his ship's sensors confirmed what they all feared. The Iron Leviathan was unyielding, and it was hunting them down. The battle was no longer about defense. It was a massacre. The human ship was not merely surviving. It was thriving in the chaos, using it to further its control over the battlefield. A cold realization began to settle over Cawthor. This wasn't just a ship. This was a force of nature. The Leviathan moved with terrifying speed despite its colossal size, ducking and weaving through the wreckage of shattered ships like a predator in the wild. There was no hesitation in its movements, no sense of panic in its crew. Everything about it exuded purpose and control, and the crew aboard the Iron Leviathan seemed to move as one. A single entity bound by a singular goal: victory. It was clear to Cawthor now that they weren't facing a warship. They were facing the embodiment of a species' survival instinct, honed over millennia on a world where every day was a fight for survival. "Sir, we can't keep up with its movements," a Ferenth officer said, fear creeping into his voice. "We're losing ships faster than we can replace them." Cawthor's mind raced. They had no plan left. Their fleet had been designed to overwhelm, not to fight with such precision and adaptability. And the humans, the Deathworlders, seemed to know exactly what they were doing. They were fighting as though they'd already won, and it looked as though they were right. The remnants of the Coalition fleet tried to regroup and counterattack, but every time they lined up a shot, the Iron Leviathan was already on the move. There was no target that wasn't moving faster than the sensors could predict. The Leviathan was a ghost, darting through the carnage, finding the weak points and exploiting them with terrifying effectiveness. In less than an hour, the remaining ships were in full retreat, each of them running for the safety of the galactic core. The Iron Leviathan pursued, unfazed by the Coalition's scattered remnants, picking off the stragglers with precision. There was no mercy, no hesitation. And still, the Deathworlders showed no signs of relenting. As the last few Coalition ships flooded into the void, the Leviathan hung in space like an unmovable force, surveying its handiwork with unblinking sensors. The message was clear now. Humanity had come for the stars. And no one, not even the galaxy's most powerful fleets, could stop them. As the final remnants of the Coalition fleet scattered into the far reaches of space, the reality began to settle in. Humanity, with only a single ship, had devastated the most powerful military alliance in the galaxy. The Iron Leviathan drifted slowly, its massive form hanging in the cold void like an immovable monolith, silent and resolute. Inside, the Deathworlders' crew remained calm, their faces devoid of celebration. For them, victory was simply the next step in their long history of survival. It was an inevitability, not a triumph. But in the heart of the Galactic Coalition, panic was spreading like wildfire. News of the Leviathan's victory reached the highest levels of the galactic leadership. A warship like no other had obliterated their fleet, and it seemed as if no force in the galaxy could stand against it. Council meetings that had once been filled with calm deliberation now erupted in chaos. It was impossible to ignore the implications of what had just transpired. How had the humans, barely even a spacefaring species by galactic standards, managed to defeat such a well-coordinated and advanced military force? The Council of the Galactic Coalition convened in an emergency session. High-ranking members from every species arrived, their faces grim. The Shinthar commander, Turl, was the first to speak. "We cannot let this stand. The humans have proven themselves to be a direct threat to our unity. They have no regard for peace, no respect for treaties. They want control." The Veltrax representative, Ilex, leaned forward, his antennae twitching with agitation. "We've tried diplomacy with them." The challenge was clear. The message was direct. There is no room for negotiation. We cannot simply allow this species to carve out its own dominion in the galaxy. A third voice, that of the Ferenth General Cawthor, rumbled from the back of the room. He still bore the weight of the Leviathan's attack on his fleet, the images of the destruction fresh in his mind. "I saw it firsthand. That ship, it wasn't just a weapon. It was a predator. I've fought battles in the most hostile environments, but nothing prepared me for the ruthlessness of the Deathworlders. They don't need numbers. They only need their ship." "What do you propose, Cawthor?" Ilex asked, his voice sharp. "We prepare for war," Cawthor growled. "We bring everything we have. We have a planet-killer weapon on standby, and we must use it now. We must strike before the humans can mobilize any more forces." The room fell silent, the weight of Cawthor's words hanging heavy in the air. The Planet Killer was the Coalition's final trump card. It was an untested weapon, a massive device capable of annihilating entire planets in one strike. Its power was enough to wipe out civilizations, even the Leviathan, or so they believed. The question now was whether they would be willing to use it, not just to end the war, but to erase the humans entirely. The Shinthar looked at Cawthor, their energy signatures flaring with distrust. "We risk everything with that weapon. If we fail, then we fail," Cawthor interrupted. "We die or we win. The humans understand that. They thrive in such conditions. We must adapt or we perish." With a deep, hesitant sigh, the Veltrax commander spoke, his voice low. "We have no choice. If we do not strike back now, we lose the galaxy to them. It's time to end this." And so the decision was made. The Coalition would launch its most powerful strike yet, a full-scale attack with a planet-killer weapon at the forefront. They would bring everything they had to bear on the Iron Leviathan, and they would not stop until humanity was eradicated from the stars. The Leviathan might have won the first battle, but the Coalition believed they could win the war. They would show the Deathworlders the true power of the galaxy's might. But as the fleet began to assemble, a question lingered in the minds of the leaders. Would their power be enough to defeat the predators they had just unleashed? The Coalition's plan was set in motion with unparalleled urgency. Every available ship was mobilized, every commander given their orders. At the core of this final counteroffensive lay the planet-killer weapon, a massive device capable of erasing entire worlds from existence. The galaxy's most powerful fleets, led by the best minds from the Coalition, had come together for one purpose: to eradicate the Iron Leviathan and its terrifying human crew. But there was a chilling realization that gnawed at the back of every strategist's mind. The Iron Leviathan wasn't just a ship. It was something more. The humans had proven they were not simply masters of technology, but of warfare itself. They didn't just fight battles. They adapted, they learned, they evolved. The Leviathan had survived every ambush, counterattack, and onslaught the Coalition had thrown at it. And that unnerving ability to evolve on the fly was now at the forefront of every leader's thoughts. In the control room of the Iron Leviathan, the human crew was preparing for the next battle. They knew the Coalition was assembling for a massive counteroffensive. They could hear the whispers of the galaxy's most powerful species rallying their forces. They could feel the threat building. But they were unfazed. The Deathworlders had fought and survived on their brutal homeworld for eons. This was just another fight, another survival challenge. Captain Mara Dune, a seasoned veteran of countless battles, stood at the helm. Her expression was one of quiet determination. She had seen the galaxy's vast fleets fall before their ship. The Leviathan was more than just metal and circuitry. It was a weapon honed by survival instinct, built with the understanding that in this galaxy, only the strongest would endure. "Prepare for engagement," Mara's voice cut through the silence of the bridge. Her eyes scanned the stars ahead, sensing the gathering storm. The crew moved with practiced precision, each member understanding their role in this dance of destruction. This was their moment, the culmination of everything they had fought for. Out in the galaxy, the Coalition's fleet was beginning to move. It was a terrifying sight. Dozens of ships, dreadnoughts, carriers, and support vessels, all bound together in one massive armée. They had one goal: the total destruction of the Iron Leviathan and its crew. But as the fleet advanced, the Iron Leviathan waited. The humans didn't retreat, didn't scatter. They didn't need to. Their tactics were not about fleeing or hiding. They were about confronting the threat head-on, adapting to whatever the enemy threw at them. The first wave of Coalition ships approached, their weapons primed. They launched their first volley, a barrage of energy beams and plasma blasts aimed at the Leviathan's hull. The Leviathan absorbed the first shots, its shields flaring to life, flickering but holding strong. The coalition commanders, anticipating a breach, ordered the second wave, but as their ships advanced, they found themselves caught in a web of calculated destruction. The Leviathan was everywhere at once. It didn't just fire, it anticipated. Its weapons cut through the ranks of the attacking ships with terrifying precision, picking off vessels one by one. Plasma cannons, railguns, and missile salvos streaked across space, turning the once proud coalition ships into wreckage before they even had a chance to retaliate. The humans were fighting smarter, faster. They didn't need overwhelming numbers. They only needed their instincts, their ability to think 2 steps ahead. For every attack the coalition made, the Leviathan adapted. The human ship had already countered every tactic the galaxy had used. They didn't need a second ship, they only needed the one that had already broken the coalition's forces. In the chaos of battle, the coalition fleet faltered. The Leviathan didn't just endure, it fought back with a vengeance, exploiting every weakness, anticipating every move. The first wave had already been destroyed, and now the second was falling apart. The Leviathan had become a beast, a relentless predator that hunted its prey with a precision that left the coalition reeling. Inside the Leviathan, Mara Dune's voice rang out once more, initiating Phase 2. They don't realize it yet, but this battle is already over. She was right. The Iron Leviathan had become an extension of the Deathworlders' survival instinct, a force that had no intention of surrendering. It wasn't just a ship, it was humanity's answer to the galaxy's arrogance, and it would stop at nothing to prove that the Deathworlders would never be conquered. The destruction of the Coalition's second wave had sent shockwaves across the galaxy. The Iron Leviathan had proven its might yet again, leaving the once proud armada broken and scattered. Despite the catastrophic losses, the Galactic Coalition wasn't ready to concede defeat. Desperation had set in, and the once unified front of the galaxy's most powerful species had splintered. The stakes had never been higher, and the Coalition's leaders knew they couldn't afford another failure. This was their last chance to stop the Deathworlders. The Council convened in secret, their discussions now tinged with fear. The idea of fighting against such an unpredictable and lethal species was no longer abstract. It had become a brutal reality. Every time they thought they understood the Iron Leviathan, the human ship adapted, revealing the new level of terror they hadn't anticipated. Their tactics were like a storm, unpredictable and relentless, leaving the Coalition reeling. "We've already lost a significant portion of our fleet," General Cawthor's voice rumbled across the room, a harsh reminder of their failures. "We cannot let this continue. They've torn through our forces like paper." The Veltrax representative, Ilex, was no less troubled. His sleek form trembled, and his antennae twitched nervously. "Every engagement has been a disaster. The Leviathan does not fight like a conventional warship. We've faced entire fleets, but none have fought like this. We don't just need a plan. We need something that can end this now." Turl, the Shinthar commander, leaned forward, his eyes glowing with a mix of frustration and resolve. "We've tried conventional tactics. It's clear now we can't win in open combat. The humans thrive in it. They've turned our own strategies against us. What else do we have?" Cawthor asked, his tone harsh. The room fell silent for a moment. No one knew how to respond. Every weapon they had, every fleet, every plan had been shattered against the Leviathan's ferocity. They were facing a force of nature, not a species they could negotiate with. But as the silence lingered, Ilix's voice broke through, low but steady. "We still have the Aegis." The room went still at the mention of the Coalition's ultimate weapon. The Aegis, a massive dreadnought, larger than any other ship in the galaxy, capable of deploying the most powerful weapons ever designed by Coalition engineers. Its size alone was enough to turn the tide of any battle, but its true strength lay in its secret weapon, a device capable of wiping out entire planets, a weapon that could strike with the force of a supernova. We've kept it in reserve for situations just like this, Ilex continued. The Aegis is still untested in live combat, but if we deploy it correctly, we can destroy the Leviathan and its crew. This could be our last opportunity to end this. There was no arguing with the logic. Despite the risks of deploying an untested weapon, it was the only option left. The Leviathan had shown itself impervious to anything they'd thrown at it. The coalition leaders had no choice but to gamble everything on the Aegis. The plan was simple: deploy the Dreadnought's full power against the Leviathan, use the planet-killer weapon to ensure no survivors, and hope the Deathworlders' arrogance had led them to underestimate the scale of the threat. Cawthor stood tall, his voice firm. "Prepare the Aegis. We launch it now." The decision was made. The coalition was assembling its final hope. The Aegis would be the harbinger of humanity's downfall, or the weapon that would forever erase the Deathworlders from existence. But what the coalition didn't know is that the humans were already anticipating their next move. The Iron Leviathan wasn't just waiting for the next attack, it was already calculating its response, adapting to the next phase of the war. The Aegis was ready. Its immense form loomed over the coalition's flagship station as it prepared for deployment. The galaxy's most powerful weapon, the last card the coalition had left to play, was now primed for action. Its massive engines hummed to life, a low, guttural sound that reverberated across the space station. The Dreadnought's sensors flared, calibrating with terrifying precision, while its weapons systems were loaded with the most devastating ordnance ever conceived. It was the final solution to the Deathworlder problem, a weapon that could obliterate the Iron Leviathan and anything in its vicinity. This was a battle of survival for the galaxy, and the Aegis was all they had left. General Cawthor stood at the helm of the Aegis, his face stern and grim. He had fought countless battles in his life, but this felt different. This wasn't just another battle. This was their last chance to turn the tide of the war. If the Leviathan wasn't destroyed here, the coalition would face utter annihilation. Every resource, every ally, every weapon was now focused on the Leviathan. There would be no second chances. Cawthor's eyes flicked over the tactical readouts as the fleet prepared to advance. The Aegis would take the lead, flanked by the remaining fleet ships. The plan was clear: strike fast, strike hard, and use the Aegis's planet-killer weapon to ensure the Leviathan couldn't escape. The strategy was built on one simple truth: overwhelm the Leviathan with everything they had. "Prepare to launch." Cawthor's voice cut through the room like a whip. His officers nodded, grim expressions mirroring his own as the countdown began. They had no illusions about what they were up against. The Iron Leviathan was not a conventional ship. It was a nightmare made manifest, and they were walking into its jaws. Meanwhile, aboard the Iron Leviathan, Captain Meridoon stood in front of the massive viewports, staring out at the galaxy beyond. The crew was already moving into position, awaiting the coalition's next move. They knew the enemy would not relent. They never did. The fleet had retreated before, but now, the coalition had revealed its true weapon, the Aegis, and it was coming for them. Mera wasn't worried. She couldn't afford to be. The Deathworlders had always thrived under pressure. They had survived every trial their homeworld had thrown at them. And this war was no different. The Leviathan had already adapted to every strategy the coalition had thrown at it. Now, it was time to face the Aegis. "Shields to maximum," Mara ordered, her voice cold and calculating. "Get the targeting systems online. We're not going to let them take us down without a fight." Her crew moved with precise coordination. Every member knew their role, each instinctively aligned with the singular goal of survival. The Iron Leviathan had already proven its ability to predict, to counterattack, to stay one step ahead. But the Aegis was different. The planet-killer weapon had the potential to destroy the Leviathan in one fell swoop. Mara's mind raced. There was no time for mistakes. Every movement, every decision would matter. The Leviathan's massive engines hummed to life, its hull vibrating as it prepared to move into position. Mara's gaze narrowed. She knew the coalition was coming. The question wasn't whether they would attack. It was whether they could land a blow that would actually matter. Humanity had fought to this point with a single ship. Now, the galaxy would feel the wrath of a species that had nothing left to lose. The Aegis's forward guns powered up, and the coalition fleet surged forward, its ships arrayed in a perfect battle formation. The Aegis was the spearhead of the assault, a colossus among the stars. But the Iron Leviathan wasn't just going to stand still. It moved swiftly, its sensors already analyzing the incoming onslaught, preparing to exploit every weakness the coalition fleet had. "Engage," Mara barked, and the Leviathan shot forward with terrifying speed, a force of nature preparing to meet its destiny. The final confrontation was imminent. The galaxy was holding its breath. The silence of space was shattered as the fleets collided in a storm of fire and fury. The Aegis surged forward like an unstoppable titan, its weapon systems charging up, ready to unleash the devastating power that could end it all. Flanked by the last remnants of the coalition fleet, it formed an impenetrable wall of firepower aimed squarely at the Iron Leviathan. The battle for the galaxy had come to this, the final confrontation between the might of the coalition and the relentless adaptability of the Deathworlders. On the bridge of the Iron Leviathan, Captain Maradoon's eyes never left the tactical display. The fleet was coming at them with everything it had. The Aegis, the massive dreadnought, was leading the charge, its weapons flaring as it prepared to unleash the planet-killer weapon. But Mara didn't flinch. She knew exactly what they had to do. "Prepare for evasive maneuvers," she ordered, her voice unwavering. The Leviathan's massive form began to shift, its engines roaring as it moved with terrifying grace for its size. The crew worked in perfect unison, every system on the ship tuned to the rhythm of survival. The first volley from the coalition hit, and the Leviathan's shields flared with a brilliant blue light. The Aegis's massive cannons fired again, but the Leviathan anticipated their trajectory. The ship twisted, bending space around it, dodging the shots by mere fractions of a second. Every burst of fire that should have been lethal missed by inches, the Leviathan dancing through the storm of enemy attacks like a predator on a hunt. "Shields are holding," an officer shouted, "but we can't keep this up forever." "We don't need to," Mara replied coldly. "We just need one chance." And the Leviathan was nothing if not patient. It had already survived countless attacks. The coalition was strong, yes, but they had one weakness the humans understood better than anyone: their overconfidence. The Aegis was powerful, but it was slow, lumbering, a massive target in the hands of an opponent who could predict its movements. Mara knew that if they could just create an opening, just one moment when the Aegis would expose itself, they could strike. The entire fleet would be vulnerable. The humans had been fighting this way for centuries, and they would fight this battle the same. Mara's plan was simple, but risky. The Leviathan shot forward, directly toward the Aegis, drawing its fire. As the massive dreadnought fired its planet-killer weapon, the Leviathan dove beneath the blast, passing just below the shockwave of its destruction. In that moment, the coalition's fleet faltered. The Leviathan's sensors locked onto the vulnerable underside of the Aegis, the only point where its shield system was weakest. "Target locked." Mara's voice was a razor-sharp whisper. "Fire." The Iron Leviathan unleashed its full barrage. Plasma beams, railgun rounds, and devastating missiles, all aimed at the Aegis's underbelly. The Aegis's shields were still adjusting from its previous shot, and the incoming onslaught was too much. The first plasma shot struck, followed by a railgun blast that tore through the outer layers of the dreadnought's hull. The Aegis shuddered violently as explosions erupted along its massive form. The Leviathan didn't stop there. More shots tore through the crippled dreadnought, breaching its core systems and setting off secondary explosions. The coalition fleet reacted in panic, trying to regroup, but it was too late. The Aegis was falling apart, its once mighty form now a tumbling wreck in space, its core reactor destabilizing. The Leviathan had struck with surgical precision, exploiting the one flaw that even the most advanced minds of the Coalition had failed to predict. As the Aegis' destruction reverberated through the battlefield, the remaining ships of the Coalition scrambled to escape. But the Leviathan was not finished. Its crew, hardened by the brutal realities of their homeworld, knew that they couldn't afford mercy. The remaining Coalition ships were picked off one by one, their weapons ineffective against the relentless assault of the Deathworlders. The last of the fleet vanished into the void, their ships either destroyed or in full retreat. The galaxy's greatest military force had been reduced to rubble, shattered by the might of a single ship, a single species. On the bridge of the Iron Leviathan, Mara Dune allowed herself a small, satisfied smile. The battle was over. The galaxy had been warned. Humanity had claimed its place among the stars, and no one would forget the cost of underestimating the Deathworlders again.